Just make a basis prediction on what you think is going to happen in the divisional round so far.
All right, so in the NFC divisional round, I'll focus on the two NFC games here. Let's just go over the game that we already have settled right now, which is going to be the Eagles going up against the Giants. So this is the third time that both of these teams have played against each other. They're divisional rivals, and as far as I see it with this game, it's going to be gritty. I think it's going to be a grimy game, simply just because when I look at New York's defense this year, they've been stingy. They have given opposing offense difficult time game in and game out. Granted, their record doesn't show it because I think they finished at a 9-7-1 record, but the defense is really, I think, the primary factor here for the Giants as a whole. Simply just because I think their defense has won them a lot of their games this year. And I think going into this game against the Eagles, that Giants defense is going to have to step up to the plate and force some turnovers against the Eagles. The Eagles this year, they are not really a turnover prone team. I think there was at one point where they were 10, 11 games into the season, and they only had 3 turnovers as a unit until they ran into the Commanders, and I think had 3 turnovers in that game alone. So the Giants, from a defensive perspective, they're going to have to turn it up, and they're going to have to force some turnovers to get the ball back to Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley. And with the way that they looked against the Vikings last week, if they're able to maintain that consistency going forward against the Eagles, they're going to have a difficult time. They're going to have a pretty good time going up against the Eagles. When it comes to the Eagles, I think they just had to have a better overall performance than they had in the last game of the year. Jalen Hurts came back. He was kind of going through some injury issues, but now that he's, I would say, probably recovered to a good extent, knowing that he had that bye week, I think their biggest thing is just be consistent on the offensive side of the ball, get into a rhythm, convert some third downs early, and put the Giants defense on their heels. If they're able to do that, I think they'll be fine. Defensively, when it comes to the Eagles, I think they'll be a better unit overall than what the Vikings were this past weekend against the Giants. So I do believe that Eagles pass rush, I think it's going to be solid. And knowing what that secondary can do to force some turnovers, I think Daniel Jones and that Giants offense could have a little bit more of a difficult time going up against the Eagles next week than they did the Vikings this past weekend. So overall, I think it's going to be a very competitive game nonetheless. Then to kick it to the 49ers and who they'll play based on who wins this Cowboys and Bucks game. So let's play hypothetical here. Let's say the 49ers play the Cowboys. I think the biggest thing with them, with the 49ers specifically, is slow down Dak. If they can slow down Dak and they can slow down the run game in Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard, I think that's going to be the game plan here. When it comes to the Cowboys this year, they've been known to turn the ball over offensively. Dak Prescott is one of the more turnover prone quarterbacks this year in the NFL, and that's despite the fact that he missed a good chunk of the season. So I think from a defensive perspective with the 49ers, ramp up that pass rush, get Dak to throw some errant passes, and let that secondary jump on it, get some turnovers, get the ball back to Brock Purdy and that offense. And from offensive perspective, Brock's got to just continue what he's been doing, not turning the ball over, giving good touches to Christian McCaffrey out of the backfield, and just literally just keep the offensive machine running and let that hum against that Cowboys defense. And that Cowboys defense has been suspect time and time again this year. And it wouldn't surprise me if that Cowboys defense gets in an early hole that they wouldn't be able to bounce back. And then to kick it to where the 49ers would go up against the Bucks, this is a game, to me, it's going to go one of two ways. It's going to be an absolute beatdown like we saw the first time when both these teams played against each other, or it's going to be a defensive battle. Because when we look back to that first matchup, the Bucks got absolutely smoked. Defensively, they couldn't stop Brock Purdy and that 49ers offense. They couldn't stop Christian McCaffrey. It was just a train wreck from a defensive perspective from the Bucks. For the 49ers, it was phenomenal. So if you're looking at this from the Bucks perspective, they got to play better defense. And Tom and the offense have to get it together. And there have been times where that Bucks offense has not looked good this year. They've been inconsistent. And it's really been predicated on the offensive line not being able to win the battle on the line of scrimmage. And we kind of saw that take place the first time that these two teams met. So from a Bucks perspective, they have to ramp up their defensive pressure. They just have to bring an overall higher degree of tenacity than they did the first time around. And they got to string some drives along to get some points on the board offensively. To the 49ers, maintain that defensive pressure that they did the first time around against Tampa, and just don't turn the ball over. I'm basically just rounding it out like this with the 49ers. Don't turn the ball over. And if they keep their offensive consistency humming, they're going to be a tough out, regardless of who they play, whether it's the Bucks or the Cowboys. But that's how I see these games playing out, just from a first impression perspective. So, Kevin, I'll let you take it from here, bro.
Yeah, I mean, so the AFC is going to be interesting for me. And the reason I say that is because I'm actually going to start with the Bills and the Bengals game. We talked about this just a few minutes ago. The offensive line of both teams were just horrible in that first matchup. Joe Burrow was getting pressured. Josh Allen was getting sacked. Turnovers were made. I mean, Joe was able to limit the turnovers to no interceptions or fumbles, and he was able also to score a rushing touchdown, obviously within the red zone. So you're looking at it like the Bengals didn't turn the ball over, but if Joe's pressured with a better pass rush from the Bills, I would assume safely that the Bills are going to get home a little bit better. I mean, when the Bills pin their ears back and that pass rush comes swarming, that is going to be a very, very competitive game. But thankfully, the Bengals don't have to worry about Von Miller, because if Von Miller was playing, this would be a whole different conversation due to the fact that there are multiple injuries on the offensive line for the Bengals. So, Joseph, count your blessings where you have it. In terms of offensive output, both teams have the potential to score 35 to 40 points. I mean, they both have explosive offenses, decent run games, but it's hard for me to pick a definitive victor. I don't know why. Once again, I've stated it multiple times, especially with what happened with DeMar a few weeks ago. The Bills are riding an emotional kind of wave right now that makes me feel like they can't lose. And I mean, that was our preseason prediction for them to make it to the Super Bowl and win. But I mean, when you're going up against Joe Burrow, one of the most poised quarterbacks, one of the most electrifying players at the quarterback position at his age, you just look and say, well, the Bengals are led by confidence. They're led by a swagger. They're led by a guy that doesn't let anything rattle him. So I would say that even if Joe does get off to a rough start, the offensive line does allow pressure. I mean, all being, knock on wood, Joe stays healthy. I think that they will make this a competitive game. I think this is going to be a shootout because both defenses did not play very well against their first round matchups. Cincinnati played a little bit better, but I will say that the Bills secondary gave me a little bit of an issue because they allowed 31 points. I know they had a defensive score, and a lot of them were in, a lot of those turnovers were giving Miami good field position. But if you couldn't stop Skylar Thompson and that offense as badly as they struggled, I don't know if you're going to be able to necessarily stop Joe Burrow and that three-headed monster of Jamar Chase, Higgins, and Tyler Boyd. I will say that Joe Mixon's got to have a better game. 1,000% Joe Mixon. They have to feed Joe Mixon. You have to establish the line of scrimmage, and that's going to be the hardest part because that offensive line is so bad for Cincinnati and so weakened that is going to be very complicated for them. Zach Taylor has got to have this offense balanced. You got to give Joe time, and the defense has got to consistently pressure Josh Allen. I mean, realistically, we all know that Josh Allen is turnover prone, especially look what he did in the first round against Miami's defense. We'll see what happens, but that one's going to be a good one. I think that is a must-see game for me. It's the game that, like I had said at the beginning of the episode, we were kind of like not necessarily robbed of because you don't want to say that based off of an injury that you can't control that. But it's the game that we unfortunately missed due to the DeMar Hamlin situation. So it'll be good to see that this is the game we're going to be able to watch on TV for next week's divisional round. Now, the Jaguars and Chiefs game, to me, it should be clear-cut and concise, right? Patrick Mahomes, Trevor Lawrence, Pat's the better quarterback. Travis Kelce, Evan Ingram, Travis Kelce. The wide receiver core for the Chiefs, they're experienced, but with Juju Smith-Schuster and a couple of other pieces, I would probably say right now, based on how hot they've been, I think Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, and Marvin Jones Jr. have been playing very well, or should I say Marvin Jones Sr.? I forget what, I don't know if he named his son Jr. or whatever, but the point of Marvin Jones, right? I think that they've been a lot hotter as of recent. I think that they have a lot of momentum behind them right now. And I think that with Jacksonville getting that come from behind win, this game will be competitive, at least in the first half. Kansas City knows how to make adjustments. Obviously, we know that Andy Reid is one of the greatest coaches in NFL history in terms of what he's been able to do for two franchises. And I believe that Kansas City will come out on top. I just don't know how it's going to start. Pat Mahomes has had some bad games this year, like every quarterback in the league does. But this is the time. You don't know if that bye week has them rusty. You don't know if Jacksonville's momentum will carry into this game going into Arrowhead. We don't know if the Chiefs' defense is going to be able to replicate what the Chargers did. There's a lot of factors kind of going into this. And I will say confidently that this is going to be, like I said, a competitive game in the first half, but I believe the Chiefs make a second half adjustment similar to what the 49ers did in their game against Seattle this past weekend, and I think the Chiefs move on. In terms of making a prediction for my last game, it's going to be difficult. I want Joe Burrow to win, but for the sake of my prediction in terms of for Josh Allen and the Bills to win the Super Bowl, I'm going to go with Buffalo. It hurts me to say that out loud. I don't want to go against Joe. I just feel that those offensive line woes are going to provide to be or prove to be very, very big issues. And the lack of the run game with Joe Mixon in the last couple of weeks doesn't give me a lot of faith. So I have the Bills and the Chiefs moving on into an AFC championship.